Last Tuesday, I sat in my study with the worship planning team talking about today's sermon. We were all still a little giddy about the news from last Sunday's offering, talking about how that would change the church's outlook on things and our outlook too. And then I said, okay, next Sunday is All Saints. And I've been wondering what to preach. I've been thinking that it might be a good time to talk about some of the stories from this church's past, believing that if First Baptist made it through hard times then, we can make it through hard times now. And everybody got very quiet. The team was reluctant to give up its good mood by talking about hard times. But then I said, we are going through hard times, aren't we? And they agreed. And one by one, we began to name the things that make these days difficult. Number one, we are at war. It's not the leading story on the news each night, but that may be only because it's been going on for so long now. And yet, from time to time, it becomes real for us, as it did just a few weeks ago when I stood at this pulpit and preached the funeral of Jamie Newman, a young soldier killed in Afghanistan whose laughter used to echo in these hallways when he was part of our youth group. Number two, we are still in the grip of an economic crisis. Things are better now than they were, but for many people they are still not good. Members of this church have lost their jobs. Others are still looking for work. I talked with a realtor in this church just a few days ago who said there are 10,000 houses for sale in Richmond. And he looked as if he would be happy to sell even one of them. Number three, we are divided as a nation. The recent elections seem to be further evidence of an us-them mentality, in which we see ourselves not primarily as Americans, but as Democrats or Republicans or members of the Tea Party. The level of rhetoric continues to escalate. The volume gets louder and louder. We can't seem to talk to each other in this country these days without using a bullhorn. Number four, we are divided as a church. Less than 2 months ago, we made a change in our membership policy that a full third of the congregation did not agree with. Some of those people have left the church. Others have pulled back long enough to think things through. Most really, have tried to accept the outcome bravely and move on. But the family of First Baptist is hurting, and it will take some time to heal. Number five, the church in America is struggling. As I've been saying for several weeks now, the church may be thriving in some parts of the world, but here in this country, it's in trouble. 50 years ago, nearly 1 out of every 2 people went to church on Sunday. Now the numbers are more like 1 in 5. Pews and offering plates are emptying out. Many churches are struggling to survive. As I said, these are hard times. But it's not like we've never been through hard times before. This church has been around for 230 years. It made it through the Civil War and through the Great Depression. I started thinking that if you could bring some of the members back from those days to gather with us this morning, to put things in perspective, it would make a difference. Got the idea from the book of Hebrews, where the writer has been going on and on about some of the great heroes of the faith, and finally mentioned some who suffered mocking and flogging and even chains and imprisonment. They were stoned to death, he says. They were sawn in two. They were killed by the sword. They went about in skins of sheep and goats, destitute, persecuted, tormented. He was writing to a church that was going through hard times. Some people had stopped coming. Others were wondering if it was worth the trouble anymore. Still others had given up on the faith altogether. And so he says to them, look, you think you're going through hard times? Let me tell you about some hard times. These people were stoned to death. They were sawn in two. They were put to death by the sword. And then he says, they didn't give up their faith. And since we are surrounded by so great a cloud of witnesses, let us also lay aside every weight and the sin that clings so closely, and let us run with perseverance the race that is set before us. Imagine that great cloud of witnesses. Imagine that every member of this church who ever lived could crowd into this sanctuary now. You can almost see them standing around the walls in their old-fashioned clothes, filling up the balcony till they're almost spilling over, sitting down here in the front and on the steps. All the people who have ever been part of this congregation with us now. What would those saints of previous generations say to us? How would they help us put things in perspective? I think of Joshua Morris, a Baptist preacher who constituted this church in 1780 with 14 members. If he could step to the pulpit for a moment this morning, I think he would look around with his mouth hanging open, unable to speak, amazed by what that little gathering had become. In fact, one of his church's previous pastors imagined just such a moment. Were Joshua Morris to rise from the dead and revisit the field of his former labors, what surprise would seize him? In vain would he search for the little framed and unceilinged house in which he used to meet the small, feeble band of disciples. Surveying our spacious, durable, and beautiful house of worship, our well-attended and well-conducted Sunday school, how would his heart overflow with gratitude to God? When the pastor who wrote those words was installed in 1836, there were about 300 white members in the church and about 2,000 black members, both slave and free. According to our church history, Jeremiah Bell Jeter studied the problems of his large biracial membership for 2 years, and in 1838 presented a recommendation asking that the First Church consider whether its white members might build in another place a house of worship for themselves. The vote was divided almost down the middle, but eventually that's what they did. In 1841, the white members of First Baptist moved into a beautiful new building at 12th and Broad, and the black members constituted the African Baptist Church, First African, which remained in the old building just down the street. It seemed like the right thing to do at the time, but in the years that followed, there must have been reason to doubt. In 1844, just 3 years later, the church reported only 10 baptisms. And in its annual letter to the Dover Association wrote, "The past year has been one of unusual barrenness. It is perhaps unnecessary to speculate on the causes of this declension. We have great reason for humiliation and penitence, and we are loudly called to reformation and increased effort to promote the interests of the Redeemer's kingdom." The next year, there were 8 baptisms. The year after that, 6.